and welcome back to Book and Page. Second series of this grouping coming at you. We're going to do some Greek tragedy. And because Greek tragedy plays tend to be a little shorter, we're going to do two at the same time, or at least one after the other. But before we get to the actual plays, we should discuss Greek tragedy and Greek theater. So, tragedy has remained a staple of the entertainment industry throughout pretty much the history of entertainment existing. But modern entertainment industry doesn't tend to use tragedy as a genre anymore. You're more likely to hear that in regards to theater, such as Shakespeare. Shakespeare had his comedies, his histories, and his tragedies. Same with Greek theater, where you've got comedies and tragedies. It's more of a subgenre now. You can have tragic elements, but at least with modern movies and television shows, I've never seen somebody set out to perform a tragedy in that sense. But we're not talking about those. We are talking about Greek theater. So, we've got this divide between comedies and tragedies, and Greek theater, of course, has some fantastic examples of these that have remained, at least in the theater realm, known, if not so much the modern realm. But I think part of the reason why Greek theater has remained sort of a staple in the theater realm is we do have Aristotle's Poetics, which discusses Greek theater to the minute detail. And Greek tragedy then also is the more popular out of the two groups, because it is his discussion about Greek tragedy that survives in its most complete form. And from what I know, we have more Greek tragedians than we do comedy writers, but I'm not a super good expert. I'm just sort of here to talk about some of the basics, and then take a look at some of these plays. So, always refer to the experts, always take what I say with a grain of salt. So I will be returning to a brief discussion of what Aristotle says, but I would like to start off with Greek theater itself, with many thanks to Anthony Everett and his text, The Rise of Athens, the story of the world's greatest civilization. This is a beautiful text. I love its historical accounts, and he covers cultural aspects as well as, you know, the empire aspects and fighting with Sparta and fighting the Persian War. So he does have a really good discussion about Greek theater at one point, and then also a discussion about the combinations between politics and Greek theater at another point. So, really, it sort of confirmed I wanted to do these plays when I was reading The Rise of Athens, because he gives you a good sense of what's actually happening here. So, many thanks to Anthony Everett, and also if you like Athens and Greek history, read this book. Read it. It's a must-read. Okay, so we've got a big theater event in Athens and the Greek world that is called the Great Dionysia. And it's named after and celebrating this guy, you might have heard of him, called Dionysus. And Dionysus is a Greek god of wine and intoxication and partying. And he does eventually become connected with some of the arts, dance, theater, things like that, which is why we suddenly have the Great Dionysia and play performances. And in fact, Athens eventually creates a separate one in the winter just for Athens, because the Great Dionysia is, like, attended by all the Greeks. All the Greek city-states want to come to this big celebration of Dionysus. So, the quick thing with Dionysus, he has sort of this interesting thing, because you'd say, okay, he's the Greek god of wine, and then Apollo's the Greek god of the arts. They've got an interesting relationship going on when you start seeing those things start sliding together. So it's really interesting, but it should be noted that Dionysus is also viewed as an external god. He's considered a foreign god to the Greek pantheon. He's been brought in from the east, and sort of slid into the Greek pantheon to the point where their myths actually have to change. So we actually have one of the Olympian gods, Hestia, giving up her seat to Dionysus so that she sits by the hearth. And suddenly Hestia doesn't have a whole lot of celebrations or anything, but every hearth fire is a shrine to Hestia. But Dionysus now has a throne on Olympus, and he's considered a Greek god, but you're always going to see that Eastern name attached to him. So the Great Dionysia as a festival did change. It started out really, again, a celebration of the fact that Dionysus is a god of wine and intoxication. So we're doing some animal sacrifices, we're doing a whole lot of drinking, and we're doing some dancing, and some naughty bits every now and then. But even at the beginning of this form, we do seem to have more of a theatrical element occurring, because we eventually carry the statue of Dionysus to the theater, and men dressed as satyrs, who are part goat and known to be followers of both Pan and Dionysus. Again, we've got this weird connection with this guy coming in. They'd show up dressed as these half-goat men and would sing what we would translate as goat songs. And Everett actually gives us a really interesting grammar development that I just want to read off quickly. So we get the pretend satyrs danced around the altar singing what was called their goat song, from tragos, or goat, and ode, or song, tragodian, whence in due course tragedy came. So, in fact, we're not just seeing the development of this festival, but we're seeing the development of theatrical language developed around Dionysus rather than Apollo. So we are starting to get these theatrical elements, and in fact this goat song that's occurring is occurring between a single individual and already a choir. So this is a group of men who sing or speak in unison and reply to the single person. So it's a give and take where you can very easily see, yeah, let's go ahead and start putting dialogue in here and start telling stories. So if you're wondering why we have these choruses specified in the two plays that we're doing, that's because, again, it really is literally a group of men talking or singing in unison, replying, and they're generally considered the perspective that the audience should be taking. So they can be very logical, but they can also fall into traps, and it's a really interesting push and pull, especially with the points where you start actually getting different choruses arguing different points, which we'll see in Oedipus the King that we're going to do. So, like I said, you could see really easily how we get dialogue tossed in, how we start getting stories. Usually most of the stories started out involving Dionysus, like the Bacchae. Bacchus is another name for Dionysus, and the Bacchae are his revelers. So that play, right off the bat, is specifically designed around the god Dionysus. But we start getting other heroes thrown in, Hercules, other gods thrown in, other pseudo-historical mythological events, which is where we get the Theban trilogy, which is the story of Oedipus and his family, which is told by several different groups. We'll be reading Sophocles specifically. So if somebody says that more than one playwright wrote about these stories, it's true. It is true. It's just a question of whose accounts survived. So, we do have expanding points, and the Great Dionysus ended up expanding into actually a 5-day-long sort of theater event. Like a marathon theater, guess what, you're sitting here, just days straight, theater coming at you. 3 of those days are devoted to tragedy. So by comparison, you can see again that tragedy already sort of has a foot up over comedy. And eventually this sort of theater event included competitions. Playwrights were specifically writing plays for these theater productions to win accolades. There were some prizes, but it's not like a really lucrative thing. And in fact, a couple of playwrights who knew each other, and historical accounts we have, say that a lot of the plays that survived didn't actually even win their festivals. So, again, it's a thing you have to take with a grain of salt, because a lot of artists are more famous after they pass away than prior to that point. So, seeing that with these plays doesn't say, oh, they're terrible plays. It's a question of what else was in the theater at the same time. And maybe those things haven't survived, which is sad for us. Okay, so we got plays, tragedies, and comedies. If you do know Greek playwrights, you probably have 4 main ones in mind, which would be Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, who I think I don't have here. I definitely have some of his plays. They're just in storage because this is a very small apartment. And all of those guys wrote tragedies. And then if you know a comedian writer, you likely know Aristophanes, who wrote comedies, but with a large portion of satire and political satire. So if you know Greek philosophy, but don't necessarily know Greek comedies, you might have actually heard of Aristophanes because he's mentioned in one of Plato's dialogues. He's mentioned in Socrates' Apology. Socrates calls him out because Aristophanes did write a play where Socrates was the bad guy and really stupid. Yep, so if you're wondering whether or not theater and politics get involved with each other, read Socrates' Apology, which is his trial, and the fact that he's sentenced to death, and then Aristophanes' The Clouds. My favorite Aristophanes, though, and I'm hoping to do both The Clouds and my favorite one, which is The Frogs, coming up, is a lovely romp into the underworld with Dionysus. So not everything is super political. That's actually more political the more I think about it. Yeah, Aristophanes, comedies that are political, and tragedies also as well, but not like calling people out, but more of an examination of history. So those are the 4 you're more likely to know. They're hardly the only Greek playwrights, and definitely read up on some of the other ones, but they're the ones that we have surviving plays from. They know each other. The Frogs, the comedy, refers to practically every Greek playwright who passed away prior to that point. But it should be noted that, yes, the Great Dionysia often had over 1,500 people actually involved in the festival itself, performing, backstage, anything like that, because they performed for thousands of people. So we definitely need more than 4 playwrights. Now, setup-wise, that's a lot of people. A lot of them are on stage. We've gotten to the point where we have multiple characters, but we still have choruses that have multiple people in them. So we do have a lot of people on stage, but a few things theater-wise we should mention. Characters are wearing masks. They're going to have open mouths, so they're going to show the main characterization of a character. Again, you might see these smiles, frowns, angry looks, things like that. All actors are male, but they do portray female characters. The female masks are more likely to be white. If you hit comedies, most presentations of Greek comedies are less likely to do this, but if you're suddenly wondering why you're seeing pot bellies, really big fake butts, and really big fake phalluses, that's normal. That's Greek comedy. Not so with tragedy. We set aside sort of the exaggerated body humor for less fun things. Stage-wise, you're on one stage, scene's not changing. You've usually got one painted canvas hanging in the back that can set the scene for you, so everything has to happen there. And none of the violence is going to happen on stage, because Greek theater really, we don't have a whole lot of technology to present that. So for the most part, if any big action scenes or horrific violence occurs, which a lot of Greek tragedies do contain, they happen off screen. So you'll notice with both our plays, we're getting a lot of messengers coming in to announce, oh my god, this horrible thing has happened, and then all the other main characters who are still alive and or not named are just like, oh my god, tell me about this terrible thing, and the messenger's like, this is the terrible thing. It's because, again, it's Greek theater, you're not killing people on stage, so you're not going to see that happen, you have to be told that. But if you're reading through just like, why are you just telling me this? It's how Greek theater generally was performed. Better performances of Greek theater now, better performances, more modern performances are more likely to start showing you some things, but you also have to be careful because then you might have to cut some pieces of content because why show it and then tell about it again? So you've got to be careful when you're producing these plays, simply because theater has changed since then. And then the last thing we should mention, so we've got the one painted scene, most stuff happening off scene to be told about on scene, and that is, we have a crane. And why do we have a crane? We have a crane so that god characters can be lowered into the scene and brought back out of the scene magically from the air. And this, of course, is called the Deus Ex Machina, or God in the Machine. So you've probably heard that term. That's where it's originally come from, is literally a machine that helps lower gods and pull them back up out of scenes. Not how we use the term anymore. Generally, we use the term to describe some character or event that just magically shows up out of nowhere at the end of the play and magically fixes everything. And we do sort of get this idea from early theater with the idea that a god shows up, maybe Zeus shows up. Boom! These were the mistakes that you made, and now you have the knowledge and everything is fixed. And then Zeus is lifted back up again. There's literally a Shakespeare play that has that answer. Like, Zeus shows up. I'm trying to remember what it's called right now. It is escaping me. But look it up. Zeus, poof, riding an eagle. Here's the information you need, and I'm gone. Is that happening in Greek tragedies? No, it is not. Why? Because nothing gets fixed in Greek tragedies. You're not gonna walk away from these like, I'm so glad they have a happy ending. There's not. There is no happy ending in Greek tragedies. I'm not sure you've really hit a happy ending for a Greek comedy, but it's not nearly as devastating as Greek tragedy. So let's talk about that a bit. Like I said, both Greek comedy and Greek tragedy, it's about suffering. It is about pain. It is about terrible things happening. The difference is, and Aristotle has specified this in his Poetics, who is suffering. In Greek comedies, it's generally lowborn or stupid characters who don't know how the world works, or characters being purposely idiotic. And the pain they go through and the suffering they go through is funny. And because they're lowborn, they're not risking a lot. Usually it's not high stakes. So they're getting beat up a bit and you're just like, ha! That guy's getting beaten up by his son. Or Dionysus is getting beat up by Hades. Another thing that's actually a play. So you can laugh at it. Because they're not super impressive characters. They're just getting beat up, and they're going to walk away from it fine. They might be a little sore, but there's nothing big at risk. That is not true with tragedies. Aristotle, again, specifies what you're actually seeing in a tragedy is a noble person who isn't particularly vicious or sinful, but through fate, one or two prior mistakes, good intentions that go wrong, and sometimes their own hubris, get rammed into the ground, everything taken from them, everything stripped away, realize that everything is horrible and there is nothing they can do about it. You are watching good people suffer. And that's the difference. When you're watching silly people suffer, it's funny because they're silly, and the suffering thus is silly. But when you're watching good people suffer, that hurts. And it's supposed to hurt. It's supposed to get you right here. Because what emotions are actually being stirred up here is pity for the people that you're watching, but also fear of what actually can occur. Because the stakes are usually higher in these plays. You're talking kings. Kings involved. Family lineages involved. Entire families gutted because of a mistake a family member made. Or somebody trying to subvert fate and actually causing it to happen. Somebody being rude to the gods. Stupid choices that don't make everyone in the story vicious, but ruin everybody in the story. A lot of people are going to suffer, not just the people who made the mistakes, not just the bad guys, but the good guys as well. And that's what really tugs at your heartstrings. Because you're not going back from it. You're not going to watch these people meet fortune. Yay, good fortune. Bad misfortune. Good fortune. That's not happening. You're literally starting up here and just dropping off that cliff. Most people are going to be dead. If you survive, you're never going to be the same. And if it's a trilogy, you're probably going to be dead by the end of it. So yeah, Greek tragedy is... it can wreck you. You'll be in tears. Especially, given a chance, you have to keep in mind as you're reading these plays that you are meant to see them performed. Even with Greek theater not being as interactive or extravagant as modern theater, there is a difference between you reading words off a page and you being able to see that performance. If you have a really good imagination, that's great. You're going to be able to pick up on these things. But it's hard to get a sense of the chorus and what it sounds like when it's only you. So if you are doing this for a class, don't be surprised if your teacher or professor wants you to get up and start performing it. And don't be shy to get involved, because that's also going to help. Helping act out these parts is going to give you a sense, because this is theater, it is motion and movement and words and call and response that you're not necessarily getting right off the page. With that said, let's quickly talk about the two plays that we are going to be reading. Both of these books have several plays in them. I likely will return to Greek tragedy and do some more in the future. Like I said, I definitely want to do some Greek comedy because they have a different sense to them that is a really good comparison to Greek tragedy. But I'm doing the tragedy first because these are more likely the ones you're going to end up studying. So, first we'll be doing Euripides the Bacchae. And this is a noble family learning not to disrespect the god Dionysus. So this particular translation is Celia Eaton, Lushnig's, and Paul Woodruff's. So keep that in mind. You are going to see differences depending on who's translating, how they're translating it. And I'm mentioning the translations here because this one is divided up into a prologue and 5 scenes. So I'll be doing a video for each of those. So we'll have 6 videos on the Bacchae. Same type of thing. We'll start with a summary of what has occurred in that section, and then we'll get on to some talking points. So this one, easy enough to decide how the videos are going to work. This second one, not so much. So we'll turn to Sophocles after the Bacchae, and this is known as the Theban trilogy. We'll be doing the second one that he wrote, which is Oedipus the King, which is the first chronologically in the trilogy. And it's more likely the one you've known about. If you know about the Oedipus complex, this is going to explain where the Oedipus complex comes from. This is a little harder for the number of videos because the play is not broken up at all, and in fact most Greek theater wouldn't. Like, I joked about a marathon of plays and you're just going to be sitting there for 5 days straight. That is really what happened. You're not going to have an intermission, you're not going to have a chance to get up and take a piss. So we're not really able to divide this up, I will be dividing it up on something of just a willy-nilly note. For the most part, this play has several sets of choruses, so I've got 5 divisions set up in my head where we've got the choruses coming in and discussing things, and then a new character coming in. I'll be treating that sort of as the divide between the scenes. So we'll have 5 videos on Oedipus the King. And like I said, if people like it, I will likely come back, do some more Greek tragedy, especially the sets of plays. That way you can get Antigone and Oedipus at Kolonos as well, because these are stories that Greeks would have known and would have enjoyed seeing performed. So with that said, I'm going to get reading, and I hope that you get reading as well. And I will see you next time with the Bacchae.